It was August 16th, 1977. The world stopped. News reports said Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was dead at 42. He was found at Graceland, his home in Memphis, Tennessee. The official story was a heart attack. A heart that just gave out from a long, hard life lived in the brightest of spotlights. But from the moment the news broke, a question started to whisper. Then it grew louder. What if it wasn't true? What if the biggest star on the planet decided he was done? What if he just walked away? The official story has holes. Big ones, small ones, things that just don't add up. Or there's the photo of the body in the casket, looking more like a wax figure than a man. There's the name on his gravestone, misspelled. There's the secret flight to Argentina, booked under his favorite alias just hours after he supposedly died. For millions of people, these aren't just coincidences. They are clues, a trail of breadcrumbs left by a man desperate to escape a life that was killing him. People say they've seen him at a Burger King in Michigan, at a supermarket in Louisiana, as a background actor in the movie Home Alone. The stories are everywhere. Maybe it's just wishful thinking. A way for fans to cope with losing a man who felt like family. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the biggest secret ever kept. A story of a man who gave up everything to gain the one thing he couldn't buy in normal life. We're going to look at the evidence, the strange facts, and the nagging questions that keep the story alive. Not to convince you of anything, but to show you why, for so many, the king never really left the building. He just found a different exit. Number 16, why was his middle name spelled wrong? It's one of the first things people point to. It's simple, it's concrete, and it's carved in stone. Go to Graceland, walk to the meditation garden, where Elvis is buried next to his parents. Look at the bronze plaque on his grave. It reads Elvis Aaron Presley, but Elvis's middle name wasn't Aaron. It was Aaron, with one A. You can see it on his birth certificate, the official document from Tupelo, Mississippi, dated January 8th, 1935, clearly spells it A-R-O-N. So why is it different on his grave? That's the question that starts the whole conversation. For people who believe he faked his death, this is a signal. It's a deliberate mistake. It's a clue for those paying attention. The argument goes like this: Elvis was a perfectionist. His father, Vernon Presley, who was in charge of the funeral arrangements, knew his son's name. There is no way they would make such a fundamental error on the man's final resting place. A typo on a newspaper is one thing. Carving the wrong name into stone for eternity is another. It's too big of a mistake to be a mistake. So it must be on purpose. The message? The person buried in that grave is not Elvis Aaron Presley, it's someone else. It's a symbolic marker for a symbolic death. The official explanation is a bit more complicated. It's said that Elvis himself was never sure about the spelling. His parents, Vernon and Gladys, had apparently intended to name him after a friend whose last name was Aaron. They also had a stillborn twin, Jesse Garon Presley. The names were meant to be similar. Later in his life, Elvis supposedly looked into the biblical spelling, Aaron, which is the name of Moses' brother in the Old Testament. He reportedly felt it was a more powerful, more correct spelling. He started telling people he wanted to officially change it to Aaron. So when he died, his father Vernon chose to honor that wish. He put the name his son preferred on the grave. A final act of love from a grieving father. But that story has its own problems. There's no official paperwork of Elvis ever legally changing his name. For a man whose entire life was a brand, a legal entity, wouldn't there be a record of that? He was a corporation. Elvis Presley Enterprises was a massive business. You don't just casually change the name of the product. And if he truly preferred Aaron, why did he continue to sign autographs and legal documents as Elvis Aaron Presley right up until his death? The story feels convenient, an easy way to explain away a very strange detail. Gail Brewer Giorgio, an author who became famous for her 1988 book, Is Elvis Alive? It's not just a fan theory, it's a starting point for a whole investigation. The mistake, if you can call it that, is so public, so permanent, it sits there in the ground at Graceland for millions of visitors to see every year. It begs the question, it forces you to wonder, so what are we left with? A simple spelling error made by a heartbroken family in a rush. Or a carefully planned message, a way for Elvis to tell the world, or at least the part of the world that would listen, that he was gone, but not dead. And if it was just a simple mistake, why has it never been corrected? With all the money and resources of the Elvis Presley estate, Why wouldn't they fix such a glaring error on the most famous grave in America? If Vernon made the decision, was he clear-headed enough at the time to make such a specific, nuanced choice about his son's legacy? Or was he following a set of instructions? Instructions left by a son who was very much alive. Number 15, what about the man on the plane? Hours after Elvis was declared dead on August 16th, 1977, the world was in chaos. The media was descending on Memphis. Fans were crying in the streets. Graceland was surrounded. In the middle of all this confusion, a strange story emerged from Memphis International Airport. A man who looked a lot like Elvis bought a one-way ticket. He paid in cash. And the destination was Buenos Aires, Argentina, the name he used to book the ticket, or John Burroughs. Now, if the name John Burroughs means nothing to you, the story is just a weird coincidence. But if you know anything about Elvis, that name sets off alarm bells. John Burroughs was Elvis's go-to alias. He used it for years to check into hotels, book flights, and move around without being mobbed by fans. It was his escape identity. The members of his inner circle, the Memphis Mafia, all knew it. It was a well-established fact. So for someone to use that specific name on that specific day to flee the country is more than a little suspicious. The theory is straightforward. Elvis didn't die in his bathroom. He initiated a plan he had been working on for a long time. While the world was focused on the ambulance at Graceland, the real Elvis, perhaps with a slight disguise, made his way to the airport. He used his trusted alias, paid in cash to avoid a paper trail, and got on a flight to South America. A place where he could disappear, a place where nobody would think to look for him. Argentina, in the late 1970s, was a place you could get lost in. It was a place far away from the flashbulbs and the screaming fans. Skeptics, of course, dismiss this. Their argument is that it's an unverified rumor. There's no plane ticket, no flight manifest with the name John Burroughs on it. It's just a story that started circulating in the frenzy after his death. They say it was likely a prankster or an impersonator who knew the alias and decided to play a cruel joke. Or it was simply a case of mistaken identity. In the days and weeks after August 16th, people were seeing Elvis everywhere. It was a mass psychological phenomenon. A man with black hair and sideburns at an airport in Memphis would naturally look like Elvis to a grieving, shocked public. But the details are what make it compelling. The fact that the ticket was one way. The destination of Buenos Aires, a common place for people to disappear to. And most importantly, the alias. Why would an impersonator use the alias? The point of being an impersonator is to be seen as Elvis, not to travel secretly as him. And if it was a prank, it was a very specific and timely one. This story was a cornerstone of the early Elvis is Alive movement. It appeared in tabloids like the National Enquirer and was discussed in hushed tones among fans. It suggested that Elvis didn't just die, he escaped. He had a plan. The John Burroughs ticket wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of a new one. A new life in a new country. It fed into the narrative that Elvis was tired. Yeah, he was sick of the pressure, the lawsuits, the demands on his life. He just wanted out. And faking his death was the only way to do it. So, who was that man at the airport? Was it just a random guy who happened to look like Elvis? Was it a calculated prank by someone who knew his secret identity? Or was it the king himself taking his first steps into a life of anonymity? We have no photograph, no ticket stub, only a story that has refused to die. And another question lingers. If someone was trying to create a hoax, why Buenos Aires? Why not a more glamorous or obvious location? And if it was Elvis, did he make it? Is it possible that somewhere in a quiet suburb of Argentina, an old man with a familiar smile is living out his days in peace, having pulled off the greatest vanishing act in history? Number 14, who was in the casket? The funeral for Elvis Presley was a huge event. Thousands of fans gathered outside Graceland. On August 17th, a day after his death, his body was put on display for a public viewing. A long line of mourners filed past the open casket to say their goodbyes. But what they saw and what the world saw in a photograph that was infamously published on the cover of the National Enquirer has been a source of debate ever since. Many people who saw the body, both in person and in the photo, had the same thought that doesn't look like Elvis. The man in the casket looked off. His face seemed puffy and swollen, almost like a mask. His nose looked different, more putty-like. One of his signature sideburns appeared to be glued on and was peeling away. His hands were smooth and waxy, not the hands of a man who practiced karate for years, hands that should have had calluses. The body just didn't look right. It looked like a very good but not perfect wax dummy. The theory is that Elvis's father, Vernon, knew his son was planning to disappear. To make the death convincing, they needed a body, so they commissioned a specially made wax figure. This figure was crafted to look like Elvis, but with enough plausible differences to be explained away by the effects of death, bloating, and the embalming process. This wax dummy was placed in the copper casket, allowing the world to see a body and believe the story. The real Elvis was already long gone. The evidence for this comes from eyewitness accounts and the infamous photograph. People who knew Elvis well, like his cousin Gene Smith, were quoted as saying that the body just didn't seem right. The Inquirer photo, which was secretly taken by a relative, became a key piece of evidence. To believers, it was proof. The waxy sheen of the skin, the oddly shaped features, the slightly askew hairline. It all pointed to a fake. The photo sold millions of copies and fueled the conspiracy for a new generation. The official explanation is that the body in the casket was, of course, Elvis. The way he looked was a result of his poor health and the circumstances of his death. He had gained a lot of weight. He was suffering from numerous health problems, including an enlarged heart and high blood pressure. These conditions, combined with the effects of rigor mortis and the embalming fluids, could easily have altered his appearance. The puffiness, the changed features, it was all a tragic but natural consequence of death. The peeling sideburn was likely just a shadow or an imperfection in the low-quality photograph. The lighting in the room could also have contributed to the waxy look of the skin. But the questions persist. Elvis had been seen in public just weeks before his death, and while he was overweight, he didn't look like the man in the casket. The change was too drastic for many to accept, and there's another strange detail. The casket itself weighed a reported 900 pounds. It was a massive, heavy-duty copper coffin. The theory suggests this was to house not just the wax dummy, but also a hidden air conditioning unit. Why? To keep the wax from melting under the hot Memphis sun and the television lights during the funeral. This sounds like something out of a spy movie, but for believers it explains why such an unusually heavy and expensive casket was used. So what did those thousands of mourners really see? Was it the body of their fallen idol, tragically altered by his final illness? Or was it a carefully crafted illusion, a prop, in the final act of Elvis's public life? And think about this. If it was a wax dummy, who made it? Such a convincing replica would have required a master artist. Where was it made and how was it transported to Graceland without anyone knowing? And if the family went to such extreme lengths, what was the real reason? Was it just to escape fame, or was something far more dangerous going on behind the scenes? Number 13. Why did he want to disappear? To understand why Elvis might have faked his own death, you have to understand the man he was in 1977. The public image was of the king. The jumpsuit-wearing superstar, selling out arenas, surrounded by adoration. The reality was much darker. Elvis was trapped. He was a prisoner of his own fame, and his health was failing. He was only 42, but he was living the life of a much older, sicker man. He was overweight, bloated from a diet of junk food and a cocktail of prescription drugs. Dr. George Nicopolis, known as Dr. Nick, was his personal physician. In the months leading up to Elvis's death, Dr. Nick had prescribed him thousands of doses of pills, painkillers, sedatives, uppers, downers. Elvis was living in a chemical fog. He had trouble sleeping, he had chronic pain, and he was deeply unhappy. He was surrounded by his entourage, the Memphis Mafia, but he was profoundly lonely. His finances were also a mess. Despite earning millions, he was spending it just as fast. He was generous to a fault, buying cars and houses for friends, family, and even strangers. But his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, took a massive 50% cut of everything he earned, an unheard of amount in the music industry. Elvis was a cash cow, and Parker was milking him for all he was worth. He was booked on grueling tour schedules that he was physically and mentally unable to handle. He would often perform, go back to his hotel room, and collapse. This was not the life he wanted. He was also deeply interested in spirituality and the afterlife. He read hundreds of books on religion, philosophy, and mysticism. He was fascinated by books like The Impersonal Life and Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. He often talked to his friends, like his hairstylist Larry Geller, about the meaning of life, about finding a higher purpose. He was searching for something more than fame and money. He spoke about wanting to retreat from the world, maybe to a monastery, to find peace. This wasn't a new idea for him, it was a recurring theme in his private conversations. And then there was the book. In July 1977, just a month before he died, a book called Elvis, What Happened. It was a tell-all expose that detailed his drug use, his volatile temper, and his bizarre lifestyle. The book devastated Elvis. He felt betrayed. His deepest secrets were now public knowledge. For a man who valued his privacy so intensely, this was the ultimate violation. Many believe this was the final straw. He knew he couldn't escape the image created by the book. The only way out was to disappear completely. So you have a man who is physically sick, addicted to prescription drugs, financially strained, spiritually searching, and publicly humiliated. Faking his death starts to look less like a crazy conspiracy and more like a rational escape plan. He had the money and the resources to pull it off. He had a powerful motive. He wasn't running towards something, he was running away from a life that was crushing him. The stage lights were no longer a spotlight, they were an interrogation lamp. So when we ask if he faked his death, maybe the better question is, why wouldn't he? What was left for him in that life? More tours, more pills, more loneliness. The idea of a quiet, anonymous life must have seemed like paradise. But could a man who lived for the roar of the crowd truly walk away from it all? Was his love for his daughter, Lisa Marie, not strong enough to keep him there? And if he did plan this escape, who helped him? He couldn't have done it alone. Someone had to arrange the body, the flight, the new life. Who were his secret accomplices? Or number 12, what was the deal with his father's reaction? Vernon Presley loved his son. There's no doubt about that. But his behavior in the days and weeks following Elvis's death struck many people as odd. He was the grieving father, yes, but some of his actions and his demeanor seemed out of place. They didn't fit the picture of a man who had just lost his only child in a sudden tragic way. This has led many to believe that Vernon was not just a mourner, he was a key player in his son's disappearance. First, there was his public appearance. Just a day or two after Elvis died, Vernon came out to the gates of Graceland to speak to the fans. He looked sad, but he also looked composed. He was calm, articulate, and in control. To some, this was a sign of immense strength. To others, it was suspicious. Where was the raw, uncontrollable grief you would expect from a father in his situation? He seemed to be playing a part managing the situation rather than being overwhelmed by it. He was the one who made the final decisions about the funeral, the casket, and the controversial spelling of Aaron on the grave marker. He seemed to be following a script. Then there are the stories about his private comments. People who were with him during that time reported that he seemed less shattered and more resigned, as if he was expecting it, or, as the theory goes, as if he knew it wasn't real. He was allegedly very quick to get Elvis's will settled and take control of the estate. While this can be seen as a practical necessity, the speed and efficiency with which he handled the business side of things raised eyebrows. There's also the issue of the original death certificate. The first one listed the cause of death as cardiac arrest, but it was followed by a second, more detailed one later. There were inconsistencies and a sense of confusion surrounding the official cause of death from the very beginning. Vernon was at the center of managing this information. He seemed determined to control the narrative. Was he trying to protect his son's legacy from the stories of drug use? Or was he trying to solidify a cover story for a death that never happened? One of the most compelling pieces of this puzzle comes from the book Elvis, What Happened. Before it was published, the authors, his former bodyguards, reportedly tried to warn Elvis and Vernon about it. They wanted to stop its release. Vernon's reaction was reportedly very strange. Instead of being furious or trying to sue, he seemed almost dismissive. It was as if he knew the book would soon be irrelevant. If he knew Elvis was planning to, the book's revelations would be old news, part of a life that his son was leaving behind. The theory is that Vernon was Elvis's most trusted confidant in the plan. Elvis knew he couldn't stay. He was sick and tired. He went to his father and laid out a plan to escape. And Vernon, seeing his son in so much pain, agreed to help. He would handle the aftermath. He would manage the funeral, the estate, and the public. His calm demeanor wasn't a lack of grief. It was the steely resolve of a man carrying out his son's final, most important wish. He was acting. and he was giving the performance of his life. Vernon himself died only 2 years later in 1979. Believers say he died with the secret, having successfully helped his son find the peace he so desperately needed. But is it fair to judge a grieving father? Can anyone say how they would react in such a horrific situation? Perhaps his calmness was just a state of shock. Perhaps his efficiency was his way of coping by focusing on tasks and responsibilities instead of succumbing to his pain. Still, you have to wonder, why was he so quick to accept the official story when so many details were unclear? Why didn't he push for a more thorough investigation into the role of the prescription drugs? And if he was in on it, how did that final conversation with his son go? What does a father say to a son who is about to erase himself from the world? Number 11. Who was that singer named Orion? In 1978, about a year after Elvis died, a new singer appeared on the scene. He wore a mask. He was signed to Sun Records, the same legendary label where Elvis got his start. And his voice was uncanny. It was not just similar to Elvis's, it was virtually identical. The phrasing, the tone, the power, the southern drawl. If you closed your eyes, you were listening to Elvis Presley. His name was Orion. The mystery of Orion became a phenomenon. His first album was titled Reborn. The cover art showed the singer in a sequin mask, with an illustration of a casket in the background. The marketing was all about mystery. Who was this man? Why the mask? The implication was clear, even if it was never stated outright. This was Elvis. He had come back, but he couldn't show his face. He was hiding in plain sight, doing the one thing he couldn't live without singing. The man behind the mask was an unknown singer from Tennessee named Jimmy Ellis. The story goes that he was discovered by Shelby Singleton, who had bought Sun Records. Singleton saw an opportunity. Ellis had a natural voice that sounded just like Elvis. He was born on the wrong side of the tracks and had been given up for adoption, so there was even a mystery surrounding his own parentage. Singleton created the Orion persona, basing it on a novel by Gail Brewer Giorgio called Orion. The novel was about a rock star who fakes his own death to escape fame. The parallels were deliberate and powerful. For years, the Orion story fueled the Elvis is alive theory like nothing else. Fans went to his concerts and were convinced. The voice was too perfect. The stage presence was too similar. Many believed that Jimmy Ellis was just a front, a name they used for the paperwork. But the man on stage, under the mask, was the real deal. It was Elvis, unable to stay away from the music and his fans, finding a clever way to perform without breaking his cover. The official story is that Jimmy Ellis was just a very, very good sound-alike. He was a talented singer in his own right who happened to have a voice that mimicked the King's. He was a tribute artist, but with a brilliant marketing gimmick. The mask and the mystery were a way to sell records. And it worked. Orion had several hit songs and a loyal following, but Jimmy Ellis himself was reportedly tormented by the persona. He felt trapped, just like Elvis had been. He wanted to be recognized for his own talent, but everyone only wanted to hear Elvis. In 1983, he famously ripped off the mask at a concert and declared, I'm not going to be Orion anymore. He wanted to be Jimmy Ellis. But the story didn't end there. Even after he unmasked, the questions continued. Was the unmasking just another layer of the deception? A way to throw people off the scent? The similarities were just too strong for many to dismiss. There are tapes of Jimmy Ellis speaking, and his natural speaking voice also sounds remarkably like Elvis's. The story of Orion, documented in the film Orion the Man Who Would Be King, is a fascinating look at identity, fame, and the power of a myth. Whether you believe it was Elvis or not, the phenomenon itself is a testament to how much people wanted to believe he was still out there. Orion gave them a living, breathing, singing ghost to hold on to. So who was Jimmy Ellis, really? Was he just a gifted singer from Alabama who got caught up in a brilliant exploitative marketing scheme? Or was the story more complicated? Could he have been a distant relative of Elvis explaining the vocal similarity? Or was the entire Orion project a carefully orchestrated comeback, a way for Elvis to test the waters to see if he could exist in the music world again, but on his own terms? And why, of all the tribute artists in the world, was this one man so perfect? Number 10. Why did he leave his favorite things behind? When someone plans to disappear, they usually take the things that matter most to them. Personal items, sentimental treasures, things they can't live without. But when Elvis died, he left almost everything behind. This might seem to argue against the theory that he faked his death, but for believers, it's the opposite. It's evidence of a very specific and clever plan. Think about what he left. He left his collection of cars, he left his private jet, the Lisa Marie, he left his guns, his police badges, and his famous jumpsuits. He left Graceland, the home he loved more than anywhere else on Earth. But most importantly, he left behind a collection of books that were deeply personal to him. These were not just novels, they were his spiritual guides. Books like The Impersonal Life and Leaves of Gold. He had read these books over and over, underlining passages, making notes in the margins. They were the roadmaps to his soul. Why would a man on a spiritual quest to find himself leave his most important spiritual tools behind? The theory is that he left them as a signal. He knew his most devoted fans knew about his love for these books. By leaving them, he was saying, I don't need these anymore. I've found what I was looking for. It was a symbolic act. He had graduated, he was moving on to the next phase of his existence, and he no longer needed the guides. He had become the master of his own life. There's another detail. He also left behind a number of uncashed checks. Small amounts, but still, it was money left on the table. Why? The argument is that it showed he wasn't in financial desperation. This wasn't a panicked flight, it was a planned departure. But the most talked about item is a specific book. There is a story popularized by Gail Brewer Giorgio that on the day he died, Elvis was seen with a book about the Chero, a famous palmist and numerologist. The book was supposedly about how to use numerology to change one's identity and destiny. He was allegedly reading it on his final flight back to Memphis. If this is true, it's a bombshell. It suggests he was actively studying how to become someone else, right up to the very end. The book, of course, was not found after his death. Did he take it with him? Was it the one thing he needed for his new life? Skeptics argue that this is all just speculation. A man dying suddenly from a heart attack doesn't have time to pack. Of course, he left everything behind. He wasn't planning on going anywhere. His death was a medical emergency, not a planned event. The books, the cars, the house, they are the possessions of a man whose life was cut short, not a man who walked away from it. The story about the Chiro book is just that, a story, with no hard evidence to back it up. But the counter-argument is that Elvis wasn't a normal person. He was a man who lived a life of symbols. His jumpsuits were symbols. His TCB taking care of business logo was a symbol. He communicated in a symbolic way. For him to leave his most precious spiritual books behind would not be an oversight. It would be a message, a final chapter written for those who knew how to read it. So what does it mean to leave everything behind? Is it the ultimate sign of a man who has renounced the material world for a spiritual one? Or is it simply the tragic tableau of a life interrupted? And what about his daughter, Lisa Marie? Could he really have left her behind? Believers suggest he would have had a plan to see her again, secretly. Skeptics say that no father would willingly abandon his child. It's the biggest emotional hole in the entire theory. So we're left to wonder, were the things left at Graceland the relics of a dead man, or the discarded costume of a man who was finally free? Number 9. What did the DNA test really prove? For decades, the debate over whether Elvis was alive was based on sightings, photos, and theories. There was no hard scientific evidence either way. Then, in the early 2000s, that seemed to change. A high-profile investigation tried to use DNA to solve the mystery once and for all. The results were supposed to be the final word, but, like everything else in the story, they only created more questions. The investigation was led by a man named Bill Beeney, a Baptist minister from Missouri, who ran an Elvis is Alive museum. He claimed to have a sample of DNA from Elvis, allegedly from a tissue sample saved from his autopsy. He also claimed to have a DNA sample from a man living in hiding, who he believed was the real Elvis. The idea was to compare the two samples. To make the comparison credible, they needed a confirmed sample of Presley DNA. They got this from a known relative of Elvis. The test was documented by several media outlets. The world was waiting, the results came back, and they were shocking. The DNA from the mystery man, the man who was supposedly Elvis in hiding, did not match the Presley family DNA. Case closed, right? The man was an imposter, Elvis was dead. But that's not the whole story. The DNA from the autopsy tissue, the sample that was supposed to be from the body of Elvis Presley, also did not match the Presley family DNA. According to these tests, the man who died on August 16, 1977 was not Elvis Presley. This threw a huge wrench into the official story. If the DNA from the body in the morgue wasn't Elvis, then who was it? This result was a massive victory for the believers. It was scientific proof that the body was a substitute. It validated the wax dummy theory. It suggested that a massive cover-up had taken place, not just with a fake funeral, but with a fake body that went through a fake autopsy. Now, the skeptical view of this is to immediately question the evidence. Where did this autopsy tissue really come from? How can we be sure it was authentic? The chain of custody for the DNA sample is highly questionable. It wasn't collected under controlled scientific conditions. It was provided by a man who already had a very strong belief and a vested interest in the outcome. It's very likely that the sample was contaminated or that it wasn't from Elvis at all. The entire experiment was unscientific and sensationalized for publicity. Mainstream science and the Elvis Presley estate completely ignore these results. For them, it's a non-story, but for those who want to believe, the DNA test is a smoking gun. They argue that, of course, the estate would ignore it. They have a billion-dollar industry to protect, an industry built on the fact that Elvis is dead. Admitting he faked his death would destroy their business model, so they have every reason to discredit the DNA evidence. The man who provided the DNA for the test, the one claiming to be Elvis, was known by the name Jess. Right? This was a reference to Elvis's stillborn twin, Jesse Garon. Jesse had allegedly been communicating with Bill Beanie and others for years, providing details about Elvis's life that only he could know. The DNA test was supposed to be the final step in his plan to slowly reemerge. So we are left with a scientific test that is either a complete fraud or the most explosive piece of evidence in the entire mystery. There has been no follow-up, no further mainstream scientific investigation into the DNA. The results were reported in some tabloids and TV shows and then faded away. Why was there no independent, scientifically rigorous effort to verify these claims? If there's even a 1% chance that the DNA from the corpse wasn't Elvis, shouldn't that be the biggest news story of the century? Or was the entire thing a publicity stunt, a cruel hoax played on a hopeful public? And what happened to Jesse? If he wasn't Elvis, who was he? And why did he go to such great lengths to perpetuate the story? Number 8, what did his last doctor know? Dr. George Nicopolis, or Dr. Nick, was Elvis's personal physician and a constant presence in his final years. He was the man who prescribed the vast quantities of drugs that Elvis was taking. After Elvis died, Dr. Nick became a villain in the eyes of many. He was accused of overprescribing and contributing to the king's death. His medical license was eventually suspended. He was the man who was there. He was the man who saw everything. So what did he really know? Officially, Dr. Nick maintained until his own death that Elvis died from a heart attack complicated by his drug use. He always insisted that he was trying to help Elvis to wean him off dangerous drugs by prescribing placebos and less harmful alternatives. He portrayed himself as a doctor in an impossible situation, trying to manage a superstar who would get the drugs from other sources if he refused. This is the official story he told in court and in his book, The King and Dr. Nick. But there are inconsistencies and strange details in his accounts that have fueled the conspiracy theories. For one, his story about what happened on the day Elvis died has changed slightly over the years. The timeline of who found the body and when the ambulance was called has been debated. These small changes could be the result of a fading memory over many decades. Or they could be the signs of someone trying to keep a complicated lie straight. The theory is that Dr. Nick was a key part of the plan to fake Elvis's death. He was the perfect accomplice. As the official doctor, he could manage the medical side of the deception. He could sign the death certificate, he could provide the official medical explanation for the death, making it sound plausible. His access to drugs also meant he could have procured a powerful sedative to knock out a stand-in body double, or to create a death-like state that could fool paramedics. Some versions of the theory suggest Dr. Nick was blackmailed into helping. Elvis might have had information on Dr. Nick's own questionable medical practices. Or maybe Elvis just paid him an enormous amount of money. Another version suggests Dr. Nick helped out of a sense of loyalty and friendship. He saw his friend and patient dying a slow death from the pressures of fame, and he helped him find the only way out. By helping Elvis D, he was actually saving his life. In interviews years after the fact, Dr. Nick would sometimes say cryptic things. He would hint that there was more to the story than people knew. He once said in an interview that Elvis was a master of disguise, and could be standing right next to you and you'd never know it. Was this just a turn of phrase or was he dropping a hint? He also admitted that he and Elvis had long conversations about death and the possibility of a different life. The most damning piece of information against Dr. Nick is the sheer volume of drugs he prescribed. In 1977 alone, he wrote prescriptions for over 10,000 doses of various narcotics and amphetamines for Elvis. While he claimed this was part of a controlled program, to skeptics of the official story, it looks like something else. It looks like he was stocking up, creating a massive stockpile of drugs that could be used for the escape plan or to pay off others who were involved. So, was Dr. Nick a negligent doctor who accidentally killed his most famous patient? Or was he a loyal friend who risked his entire career to help the man he admired escape a living hell? He took many of his secrets to the grave when he died in 2016, but the questions remain. If he was just a doctor trying to help, why were his stories sometimes inconsistent? What was the real nature of his late-night conversations with Elvis? And if he did help Elvis escape, did he ever see him again? Did he know where Elvis went? The man who was closest to Elvis in his final, drug-addled days might just be the man who held the key to the entire mystery. Number 7. Why did a black helicopter land at Graceland? In the hours after Elvis's death was announced, Graceland became the center of the universe. The gates were swarmed with fans, reporters, and police. The whole world was watching. But according to some eyewitnesses, something very unusual happened amidst the chaos. A mysterious, unmarked black helicopter landed on the lawn of Graceland, stayed for a few minutes, and then took off again. This story is one of the more cinematic elements of the Elvis conspiracy. It sounds like something out of a spy thriller, but it's a persistent part of the lore. The accounts come from fans who were part of the vigil outside the gates. They claim to have seen it. A sleek, dark helicopter with no identifying marks swooped in, landed briefly, and then disappeared. The theory is that this helicopter was the getaway vehicle, while the world's attention was focused on the front of the house and the ambulance that had supposedly taken Elvis's body. The real, living Elvis was being whisked away from the back lawn. The helicopter was a secret extraction team, part of a well-organized and well-funded operation. Who would have access to an unmarked black helicopter? The immediate suspect is the government. This ties into another major branch of the conspiracy that Elvis was working as an undercover federal agent. This sounds crazy, but there's a sliver of truth to it. Elvis famously met with President Richard Nixon in 1970 and was made an honorary agent for the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. He was passionate about fighting the drug culture that he saw destroying America. The theory goes that his honorary title was just a cover. He was a real deep cover agent, using his access as a celebrity to gather intelligence on organized crime and subversive elements in the entertainment industry. By 1977, his cover was about to be blown. The mob or some other dangerous group had found out about his work. His life was in danger. So the government staged his death to get him out. They put him into a version of the witness protection program. The black helicopter at Graceland was the FBI or the CIA, extracting their most valuable asset. This theory explains a lot. It explains why the disappearance had to be so elaborate. It explains where the money and resources came from, and it explains why everyone from his family to his doctor to the local authorities would go along with the cover-up. It was a matter of national security. The skeptical take is that there was no helicopter. It's a complete fabrication. In the emotional, chaotic atmosphere outside Graceland, people saw and heard things that weren't there. It was a mass delusion, a rumor that got started and then took on a life of its own. There are no photos of this helicopter. There are no official flight records. The Memphis police, who were securing the scene, have no report of it. It's a story with no evidence. And even if there was a helicopter, there could be a simple explanation. It could have been a news crew trying to get an aerial shot. It could have been law enforcement surveying the scene. The fact that it was unmarked is easily embellished by storytellers over the years. But for believers, the lack of official record is proof of how secret the operation was. Of course it wasn't on any flight logs. Of course the police would deny it. They were all part of the cover-up. The black helicopter is a potent symbol. It represents a level of planning and power that goes beyond a celebrity just trying to run away. It suggests a deeper, more dangerous game was being played. So did a phantom helicopter really land at Graceland on that fateful day? Was it a figment of a collective imagination fueled by grief and shock, Or was it the sound of the king's secret escape, the final beat in his rock and roll life, hidden from all but a few dedicated observers? And if he was a government agent, what mission was so important that it required the death of America's biggest icon? What did he know that made him so dangerous? Number 6, what was the connection to the mob and the FBI? This is where the story goes from a celebrity trying to escape the spotlight to something much darker and more complex. The idea that Elvis was connected to the mob or working with the FBI seems far-fetched, but there are some strange facts that lend it a degree of plausibility. This isn't just about Elvis being tired of singing Hound Dog. This is about a man caught in a dangerous world of crime and espionage. The main proponent of this theory is a man named Monte Nicholson, a former Los Angeles sheriff's deputy who worked in intelligence. He wrote a book in 1989 called The Presley Arrangement. In it, he claims that he was contacted by a man who was working with Elvis. This man told him that Elvis had become involved with a criminal organization called the Fraternity, which was an offshoot of the Mafia, and Elvis had apparently used his private jet to help them transport illicit funds. According to Nicholson's story, Elvis got in too deep. He realized how dangerous these people were, and he wanted out. So he made a deal with the U.S. government. He would provide evidence against the fraternity in exchange for a new identity and a new life in the witness protection program. The government agreed. His death in 1977 was the execution of that deal. It was a perfectly staged event to trick the mob into thinking their problem was gone. This theory neatly explains many of the mysteries. It explains the high level of organization and the secrecy. It explains why his family and close friends would have to maintain the lie their lives would be in danger if they didn't. It explains the black helicopter at Graceland. It was a federal extraction. It also explains Elvis's state of mind in his final year. His fear, his paranoia, his drug use. It wasn't just about the pressures of fame, it was the terror of being a marked man. There are some pieces of circumstantial evidence. Elvis did have a strange fascination with law enforcement. He collected police badges from all over the country. He often carried a gun. He saw himself as a patriot who wanted to fight crime and drugs. His famous meeting with President Nixon was to offer his services to the country as an undercover agent. While this was largely seen as a celebrity whim, what if Nixon took him seriously? Also, Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, was a mysterious figure with a shady past. He was an illegal immigrant from the Netherlands, and his real name was Andreas van Kuyk. He had a background in the circus and was known for his ruthless business practices. Some have speculated that Parker himself had ties to organized crime, and that he was the one who pulled Elvis into that world. The official story, of course, is that this is pure fiction. There is no credible evidence that Elvis was ever involved with the mob or worked as a real FBI informant. The Presley estate dismisses it completely. Monte Nicholson's book is seen as a sensationalist tale, a way to cash in on the Elvis myth. Law enforcement agencies have never confirmed any part of his story, but the theory persists because it provides a motive that is big enough to justify such an extreme act. Escaping fame is one thing. Escaping a death sentence from the Mafia is another. It turns Elvis from a burnt-out rock star into a hero, a man who risked his life for his country and had to give up his identity as a result. So was Elvis just a singer, or was he playing a much more dangerous role behind the scenes? Was his obsession with law enforcement just a hobby, or was it his real job? And if he did go into witness protection, did the government hold up its end of the bargain? Did they give him a quiet life, or was he just a pawn in a bigger game? The truth, if it exists, is likely buried in redacted government files that will never see the light of day. Number 5, what about all the sightings? If Elvis really is alive, then where is he? The answer, according to thousands of people, is everywhere. Since the day he died, the sightings started, and they have never stopped. It's one of the most enduring parts of the legend. People don't just think he's alive, they claim they have seen him with their own eyes. The most famous early sighting happened in Kalamazoo, Michigan, in the late 1980s. A woman named Louise Welling claimed she saw Elvis at a local Burger King. She took a photo. The story and the blurry picture ended up in the papers. It became a global sensation. This was followed by another sighting at a supermarket in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Again, a photo was produced. The man in the photos looked like an older, heavier Elvis. He had the familiar face, the dark hair, but he was dressed like a regular guy. These sightings became a pop culture joke. Elvis was seen pumping gas, buying donuts, working at a convenience store. The Elvis is alive hotline was flooded with calls. But for believers, these weren't jokes. They were data points, evidence that he was out there living a simple, anonymous life. He had to eat, he had to buy groceries. Of course, he would be seen in public occasionally. Then there's the Home Alone theory. In the 1990 movie Home Alone, there's a scene where Catherine O'Hara's character is arguing with an airline employee at the Scranton airport. Standing behind her in line is a man with a beard and a turtleneck. This man, according to a dedicated group of fans, is Elvis Presley. He was working as a movie extra. They point to the way he holds his head, his eye color, and his general appearance. The director, Chris Columbus, has laughed it off, but the theory has its own website and detailed video analyses. Another famous sighting is of a man who worked as a groundskeeper at Graceland in the years after Elvis's death. He had a long gray beard and ponytail, but some fans who saw him were convinced his face and voice were unmistakable. Was it Elvis, unable to stay away from his beloved home, hiding in the one place no one would ever think to look for him? The skeptical explanation for all of this is simple mistaken identity and wishful thinking. Elvis Presley is one of the most recognizable faces in modern history. There are millions of people in the world who might bear a passing resemblance to him. And there are thousands of professional Elvis impersonators. After he died, seeing Elvis became a kind of cultural game. It was easy for someone's uncle who had black hair and sideburns to be mistaken for the king. The human brain is wired to see patterns, especially when it wants to. A grieving public wanted to see Elvis, so they did. But the sheer number and persistence of the sightings is staggering. They aren't just in the United States, they come from all over the world. People claim to have seen him in London, in Australia, and Argentina. While 99% of these can be dismissed, what if just one of them is real? What if that man in the Burger King in Kalamazoo really was him, just trying to grab a quick lunch? The sightings force us to ask a practical question. If Elvis did fake his death, how could he possibly stay hidden? In a world of cameras, and now the internet and facial recognition, how could the most famous person of the 20th century just blend in? Believers would say he was a master of disguise, or that he lived in a very remote area. Or maybe, just maybe, he was hiding in plain sight, counting on the fact that no one would ever believe it was really him. So are these thousands of sightings just a collective hallucination? Are they a testament to the enduring power of his image? Or is one of them the real story? Is there a grainy photograph or a fleeting memory out there that holds the truth, dismissed as a joke by a world that stopped believing in miracles? Number 4, what did he say on those secret tapes? One of the most compelling and controversial pieces of evidence in the Elvis is Alive saga comes from the author Gail Brewer Giorgio. In the mid-1980s, she was researching her novel Orion about a rock star who fakes his death. As part of her research, she claims she was given a cassette tape. On that tape, she says, is a recording of a phone conversation with Elvis Presley, like a conversation that took place in 1981, 4 years after he was supposed to be dead. The tape is stunning. The man on the phone sounds exactly like Elvis, not an impersonator trying to sound like him, but the real man. His voice is older, more tired, but it has the unmistakable cadence, the accent, the unique patterns of his speech. On the tape, he talks about his life in hiding. He discusses his reasons for leaving, his spiritual beliefs, and his loneliness. He talks about wanting to come back but being afraid. He says things like, people don't just up and die because they're tired of the business. He reflects on his life and the choices he made. It's an intimate, rambling, and deeply personal conversation. Brewer Giorgio included excerpts of this tape in an audiobook that accompanied her 1988 non-fiction book, Is Elvis Alive? The book and the tape became a sensation. People were mesmerized. Voice analysis experts were brought in to study the recordings. Some concluded that it was in fact highly likely to be the voice of Elvis Presley. A man named L.G. Kirsta, a voice print expert who had worked with the FBI, analyzed the tape and said the probability of it being Elvis was over 90%. This was huge. It was no longer just a theory, it was potential proof. The tape seemed to confirm everything the believers had been saying. That Elvis was alive, that he was in hiding, and that he was struggling with his decision. The tape provided a motive straight from the horse's mouth. He wasn't dead, he had just retired. The official story from the Elvis Presley estate is that the tape is a cruel and elaborate hoax. They argue that it's an impersonator, a very good one, but an impersonator nonetheless. They point out that voice print analysis is not a foolproof science and is not always admissible in court. They say that Gail Brewer Giorgio fabricated the story to sell books. She has never revealed the source of her tape, saying she needs to protect the person who gave it to her. This lack of a clear origin makes it easy for skeptics to dismiss it, but the tape is hard to ignore. The man on it talks about details of Elvis's life that only someone very close to him would know. He uses phrases and nicknames that were common in Elvis's inner circle. If it is an impersonator, he is an incredibly well-researched and talented actor. The existence of this tape, and others that have since surfaced, adds a whole new dimension to the mystery. It's one thing to look at blurry photos or debate the spelling of a name. It's another thing entirely to hear the man's voice, seemingly from beyond the grave. It's personal, it's emotional, it feels real. So who is the man on the tape? Is it Elvis, reaching out from his self-imposed exile, needing to talk to someone? Or is it a brilliant fake, a performance designed to exploit the hopes of millions of fans? If it's real, who was he talking to and why? And what other tapes might be out there locked away in a safe, waiting for the right moment to be revealed? The voice on that cassette tape continues to haunt the entire story, a ghost in the machine. Number 3, why was the life insurance policy never cashed? Money always tells a story, and in the case of Elvis Presley's death, there's a very big financial question that has never been answered. Why was his life insurance policy never cashed? According to several investigators and authors, including those behind the 1991 TV special, The Elvis Files, Elvis had a life insurance policy with Lloyd's of London worth several $1,000,000. And yet, the policy was never claimed by his estate. This is a massive red flag. Why would the Presley estate, which was in considerable debt when he died, not cash in on a multi-million-dollar policy? It doesn't make any sense. Vernon Presley was a practical man. He was trying to get the estate's finances in order. Leaving millions of dollars on the table seems completely out of character, unless there was a very good reason. The reason, according to the theory, is simple. You can't cash a life insurance policy on someone who isn't dead. To do so would be insurance fraud, a serious federal crime. Lloyd's of London is a notoriously thorough company. They don't just pay out millions without an airtight investigation. They would have conducted their own inquiry into his death. If they found any irregularities, any hint that things weren't as they seemed, they would not have paid. The theory goes that the estate never even tried to file a claim because they knew it wouldn't work. They knew Elvis was alive. Filing a fraudulent claim would have exposed the entire plot. So they had to forego the money to protect the secret. The fact that they were willing to give up millions of dollars shows how serious the situation was. This wasn't just about escaping fame. This was a life or death situation, possibly related to the mob theory. Protecting Elvis's new identity was more important than the money. The official explanation is, well, there isn't really a clear one. The Elvis Presley estate has never publicly addressed the life insurance issue in detail. They are a private entity and are not required to disclose their financial dealings. The story of the uncashed policy primarily comes from researchers and journalists who claim to have inside sources. Skeptics argue that the policy may not have existed at all, or that its terms were different. Perhaps it had a suicide clause or a clause related to death by prescription drug abuse that made it invalid. Without seeing the actual policy documents, it's impossible to know for sure. But if the policy did exist as described, its status is one of the hardest pieces of evidence for the official story to explain away. It's not a matter of interpretation like a blurry photo. It's a matter of finance, a concrete business decision. People don't just walk away from free money. This piece of the puzzle suggests a level of cold, calculated planning. The decision not to cash the policy would have been made by Vernon Presley, the executor of the will. It implies he was not just a grieving father, but a co-conspirator, carefully managing the fallout of his son's disappearance and making sure not to make a single mistake that could unravel the whole thing. So what is the truth about the insurance policy? Did it even exist? If it did, why was it left unclaimed? Was it a simple case of a policy being voided due to the circumstances of his death? Or is it the ultimate financial clue, a multi-million-dollar breadcrumb that points to a man who outsmarted not only his fans and the media, but one of the biggest insurance companies in the world? Number 2, how could the official cause of death be so wrong? From the very beginning, the story of how Elvis died was confusing and contradictory. On the afternoon of August 16, 1977, the medical examiner Dr. Jerry Francisco held a press conference. He announced that the cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia, basically an irregular heartbeat. He emphatically stated that drugs were not a major factor. The death was from natural causes. A bad heart. But anyone who knew Elvis knew that wasn't the whole story. The man was taking a staggering amount of prescription medication. The toxicology report, which came out weeks later, confirmed this. His system was filled with drugs: Dilaudid, Percodan, Demerol, Quaaludes, and a host of others. At least 10 different drugs were found in significant quantities. The new information directly contradicted the initial report. The cause of death wasn't just a heart attack, it was a heart attack brought on by a massive cocktail of prescription drugs. It was a polypharmacy overdose. This is where things get strange. The official autopsy report for Elvis Presley was sealed. His father, Vernon, had it legally sealed for 50 years. This means that the complete, detailed medical findings from his post-mortem examination will not be publicly available until 2027. Why? If the cause of death was a simple heart attack, why the extreme secrecy? The theory is that the autopsy report was sealed because it doesn't describe the death of Elvis Presley. It might be the autopsy of a body double, and the findings wouldn't stand up to scrutiny. Or, more likely, it contains evidence that would prove the death was staged. Perhaps the levels of drugs were so impossibly high that no human could have ingested them and survived for any length of time. Perhaps it notes physical characteristics that don't match Elvis, like different organ sizes or old injuries. By sealing the report, Vernon Presley ensured that no one could challenge the official story for half a century. By 2027, most of the people involved would be long gone. Even the death certificate is a source of controversy. The original death certificate was signed by Dr. Nick, but it was later challenged. A second revised certificate was issued. There are even claims that the signature of the funeral director was forged. The paperwork surrounding the most famous death of the 20th century is a mess. Let's look at his health. The official story is that he was a very sick man. He had an enlarged heart, high blood pressure, and damaged colon. He was in terrible shape. But some argue that while he was unhealthy, he wasn't on death's door. The image of him as a frail invalid was exaggerated to make his sudden death more believable. It was part of the narrative. So you have a medical examiner who gives an initially misleading cause of death. You have a toxicology report that tells a completely different story, and you have a crucial piece of evidence, the autopsy report, that is locked away from the public for 50 years. This is not how a normal investigation works. It reeks of a cover-up. The question is, what were they covering up? Were they just trying to protect Elvis's image from the shame of a drug overdose? That's the most common explanation. The family wanted him to be remembered as the king, not as an addict. But would that justify sealing the autopsy for 50 years? Or was the cover-up about something much bigger? Was it to hide the fact that there was no death at all? What is in that autopsy report? What secrets does it hold that were so important they had to be hidden for 2 generations? When it is finally unsealed in 2027, will it put the rumors to rest once and for all? Or will it be the final explosive piece of evidence that proves the king never died? Number 1, what if he just told us he was leaving? Maybe the biggest clue was not hidden at all. Maybe Elvis told us exactly what he was going to do. We just weren't listening. For people who believe he faked his death, the answer is not in DNA tests or secret tapes. It's in his own words and actions in the months leading up to August 1977. Elvis was a man who communicated in his own way. He used symbols, hints, and in jokes. His conversations with friends were often filled with spiritual searching and a deep desire for a different kind of life. He repeatedly talked about wanting to escape, to go to a monastery, to find a place where he could just be a man, not a king. To many, this was just talk, the musings of a tired celebrity, but to others, it was a statement of intent. He was laying the groundwork, he was telling people his plan, couched in the language of philosophy and religion. Look at his last concert. It was in Indianapolis on June 26, 1977. His performance of the song Unchained Melody is haunting. He sits at the piano, overweight, sweating, clearly in poor health, but he sings with a passion and an emotion that is almost unbearable. It feels like a goodbye. At the end of the show, he famously said to the audience, "We'll meet you again. God bless. Adios." The word adios in Spanish literally means to God. It was a final spiritual farewell. And then there is his fascination with the book The Impersonal Life. This wasn't just a book he read, it was his Bible. He gave away hundreds of copies to friends and fans. The central message of the book is that the individual self, the I, is an illusion. True peace comes from letting go of the ego and merging with a universal consciousness. What is faking your own death if not the ultimate act of letting go of the ego? By killing Elvis Presley, the public persona, he was living the philosophy of his favorite book. He was trying to become a nobody, to find his true impersonal self. Consider the timing. The book Elvis What Happened came out just before he died. It destroyed his public image. The timing is almost too perfect. It gave him the final push, the perfect public reason for his decline and death. It was the last piece of the puzzle. He now had a public narrative that explained his demise. This is the core of the theory for many. It's not about a complex plot with the FBI and the mob. It's a deeply personal, spiritual decision. Elvis was on a journey. He had reached the end of the road as Elvis Presley. The fame, the drugs, the isolation, it was a dead end. The only way forward was to start a new life, a spiritual life, free from the prison of his own identity. His fake death was not a trick. It was a form of rebirth. This is the most compelling and, in a way, the most beautiful version of the story. It doesn't require us to believe in wax dummies or secret helicopters. It only requires us to believe that a man reached a point where he was willing to do the most extreme thing imaginable to save his own soul. He didn't run away from his life. He graduated from it. But could it be that simple? Could a man so enmeshed in the machinery of global fame just walk away? Did he truly find the peace he was looking for, or did he spend the rest of his days as a lonely man, haunted by the ghost of who he used to be? And if he did achieve this spiritual escape, does that mean the sightings and the tapes are all fake, distractions from the real, much quieter truth? What if the greatest secret is not that he's hiding in Argentina, but that he's living a quiet, prayerful life somewhere, having found the one thing his fame could never buy him: freedom?